Silas Brennan dropped to his knees in the dirt outside the Golden Dust Saloon. His hands trembled as he reached toward the girl crumpled against the hitching post, a child no older than 15. Her lips split open, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to disappear. "Please," she whispered through bloody teeth. "Don't tell them you saw me." Those 5 words cracked something open in Silas's chest, something he'd buried 3 years ago with his wife and son. He didn't know her name yet, didn't know what hell she'd survived. But in that moment, looking into those terrified blue eyes, Silas Brennan made a decision that would change both their lives forever. If you want to follow Ruth and Silas's journey to the very end, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. The summer heat pressed down on Dusty Creek like a punishment from God himself. Silas Brennan hadn't planned on coming to town today. He'd avoided it for 3 years now, preferring the quiet company of cattle and the endless rhythm of ranch work to the pitying glances of townfolk who remembered when he'd been a different man. But his sister Clara had insisted. "You're running out of coffee," she'd said that morning standing on his porch with her arms crossed. "And flour, and soap, and basic human decency, Silas. When's the last time you spoke to anyone besides me and your horse? Horse don't ask stupid questions. Neither will the general store clerk. Go." So here he was riding down Main Street at high noon, his hat pulled low against the glare. That's when he heard her cry out. It wasn't a scream she'd learned not to scream. It was a sharp, bitten-off sound of pain quickly swallowed. The kind of sound a person makes when they've been hurt so many times they've stopped expecting anyone to care. Silas pulled his buckskin to a stop. The girl lay sprawled in the alley beside the Golden Dust Saloon, one arm twisted beneath her, her face pressed into the dirt. A man stood over her thick-necked, red-faced, his boot drawn back for another kick. "Get up," the man snarled. "Quit your lazying around. Those floors ain't gonna scrub themselves." "I'm sorry, Uncle Vernon. I'm sorry, You'll what cry some more, that what your mama taught you before she burned up crying and uselessness." Silas dismounted before he'd made a conscious decision to move. "Hey." Vernon Hawkins spun around his face, twisting from rage to false pleasantry so fast it would have been impressive if it weren't so disgusting. "Well now, Silas Brennan, ain't seen you in town for—" "Step away from that child." Vernon's smile flickered. "Now hold on, this here's family business. The girl's my niece, see, and she's just—" "I said step away." Something in Silas's voice made Vernon take a half step back. Maybe it was the quiet certainty. Maybe it was the memory of who Silas Brennan used to be, a Texas Ranger who'd faced down Comanche war parties and Mexican bandits without flinching. The girl slowly pushed herself up onto her hands and knees. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. Bruises mottled her thin arms like storm clouds gathering. When she lifted her face, Silas saw the fresh split in her lip blood trailing down her chin. But it was her eyes that stopped his heart, blue as summer sky, empty as an abandoned well. She looked at him without hope, without expectation, like she'd stopped believing anyone would help her long ago. "What's your name?" Silas asked, his voice gentler now. She glanced at Vernon, flinching when he shifted his weight. "Ruth," she whispered. "Ruth Colton." "How old are you, Ruth?" 15, sir." "And how long you been living with this man?" Vernon stepped forward, his false smile stretching wider. 3 years now. Ever since her folks died in that terrible fire, God rest their souls. My wife and I took her in out of Christian charity. Fed her, clothed her, gave her a roof. She's just a bit clumsy is all. Always falling down, bumping into things. Ain't that right, Ruth?" Ruth didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke louder than any words. Silas looked at the bruises on her arms, the old ones yellow-green and fading, the new ones purple-black and fresh. The pattern of them told a story anyone with eyes could read. "Get up, Ruth." She flinched again at the command, then slowly climbed to her feet. Her legs trembled, She kept her eyes fixed on the ground. "Now see here," Vernon said, his voice hardening. "I don't know what you think I ain't thinking anything yet." Silas pulled a silver dollar from his pocket and held it out to Ruth. "Go on over to the general store. Buy yourself something cold to drink. Wait there." Ruth looked at the coin like he'd offered her a snake. I can't, sir. I got work to. I'm asking you to go. Please." That word please seemed to break something in her. Her chin wobbled. Her eyes glistened. She took the coin with trembling fingers. "Thank you," she breathed and fled. Silas waited until she disappeared around the corner before turning back to Vernon Hawkins. The saloon owner's false pleasantry had melted away entirely now, leaving only hard calculation. "You got something to say, Brennan?" "Ain't nothing to say, just observing." Observing what a man disciplining his own kin. That's his right. Discipline. Silas tested the word like it tasted foul. "That what you call it? Girl needs a firm hand. Her mama spoiled her rotten before she died. We're just trying to teach her proper gratitude for everything we've done for her." "Gratitude? You gonna keep repeating every word I say, or you got a point?" Silas took one step closer. Just one. But Vernon stumbled backward like he'd been shoved. "I got a point," Silas said quietly. "Don't let me catch you putting hands on that child again. She ain't your concern. I'm making her my concern." Vernon's eyes narrowed. Behind the fear, Silas could see the wheels turning, the calculations being made. "You lost your own family, Brennan. I heard about that. Terrible thing. But that don't give you the right to go sticking your nose in other people's affairs. Ruth is mine." He caught himself. "Ours. Mine and my wife's. Legally. The county court appointed us her guardians. You can't do nothing about that." Silas said nothing. He just looked at Vernon Hawkins until the man's swagger began to crack. "Stay away from my niece," Vernon finally said, backing toward the saloon's rear door. "I mean it. Whatever you're thinking, just forget it. She's got a home. She's got family. She don't need saving from nothing." He disappeared inside the door, slamming behind him. Silas stood alone in the alley for a long moment. The summer heat pressed down on him. The smell of horse dung and spilled beer filled his nostrils. 3 years ago, he'd buried his wife Eleanor and his 8-year-old son Thomas within a week of each other. Eleanor had taken the fever first. Thomas had followed, slipping into the river during his mother's burial and drowning before anyone noticed he was gone. Silas had wanted to die after that. Had prayed for it some nights when the silence of the empty ranch house pressed in like a living thing trying to smother him. But death hadn't come. Just more empty days. More meaningless work. More nights staring at the ceiling wondering why God had left him alive when he'd taken everything that mattered. Now standing in this filthy alley with blood drying on the ground where a child had fallen. Silas felt something stir in his chest, something that felt almost like purpose. He found Ruth at the general store, perched on a barrel near the back, clutching a bottle of sarsaparilla, like it might be snatched away at any moment. She tensed when she saw him. "Easy," Silas said, holding up his hands. "Just came to check on you." "You shouldn't have done that." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "He's gonna be so mad. He's gonna—" She cut herself off, looking away. "Gonna what, Ruth?" "Nothing. It don't matter." "It matters." She laughed, then a broken sound that had no humor in it. "Mister, I appreciate what you did back there. I do. Nobody stood up for me since—" She trailed off, her jaw tightening. "But you can't help me. Nobody can. I belong to them now. That's just how it is. You don't belong to nobody but yourself. Easy for you to say. You don't know how things work." Silas pulled a wooden crate over and sat down across from her. The store owner glanced their way but said nothing. Silas Brennan wasn't a man people questioned. "Why don't you tell me," he said, "how things work?" Ruth studied his face for a long moment, looking for the trick, looking for the hidden cruelty that experience had taught her always came eventually. When she didn't find it, something in her seemed to crack. "My folks died when I was 12, she said quietly. "Fire took our house. Took everything. I watched it burn from the street while the whole town just stood there. I'm sorry. Everybody's sorry. Sorry don't rebuild houses. Sorry don't bring back dead parents." She took a shaky breath. "After that, the court gave me to my Aunt Prudence, Mama's sister. Mama always said they weren't close, but I thought—" Another bitter laugh. "I thought blood meant something. It should. Well, it don't. First week I was there, Vernon made it real clear how things would be. I had to earn my keep. Every bite of food, every night's shelter, I owed them for all of it. And they kept a tally, mister. A real one. Vernon's got a ledger book where he writes down everything they spend on me. 3 years of food, clothes, medicine. Every penny." Silas felt his jaw tighten. "How much?" Ruth shrugged, but her eyes glistened. $600 last I heard, give or take. Might as well be 6 million. I'll never pay it off. Vernon knows that. That's the whole point. What happens when you can't pay? The question hung in the air between them. Ruth's hands tightened around her sarsaparilla bottle until her knuckles went white. "I work," she said finally. "I scrub floors, I wash dishes, I do laundry. And when that ain't enough—" She swallowed hard. "The saloon's got rooms upstairs. Boarding house, Vernon calls it. Sometimes the men who stay there, they—" She couldn't finish. Silas felt something cold and sharp crystallize in his chest. "Has anyone—" "No, not yet. But Vernon keeps talking about how I'll be 16 soon. Says that's when I'll really start earning my keep. Says I should be grateful he's waited this long." Her voice cracked on the last words, and suddenly she wasn't a hardened survivor anymore, just a frightened child, trying not to cry in front of a stranger. "I'm sorry," she whispered, swiping at her eyes. "You don't need to hear all this. You got your own troubles. Everyone does." "Ruth." She looked up at him. "I buried my wife 3 years ago," Silas said quietly. "And my son, 8 years old, Thomas. He had blue eyes, like yours." Ruth said nothing, but she was listening now. "After they died, I wanted to quit. Just lie down in the dirt and let the world move on without me. But I didn't. Don't rightly know why. Maybe just too stubborn. Maybe I was waiting for something. Waiting for what?" Silas looked at this broken child, this 15-year-old girl who'd been beaten and used and told she was worthless for 3 long years, and felt the answer rise up from somewhere deep inside him. "Maybe I was waiting for you." Ruth's eyes widened. "Mister, I got a ranch, 2 hours ride from here. It ain't much, but it's mine. Got an extra room that's been empty since Thomas passed. Got a sister who teaches at the schoolhouse, and would probably talk your ear off about books if you let her. Got cattle that need tending, and a garden that needs growing, and a whole lot of quiet that don't hurt nobody." "Are you—" Ruth's voice trembled. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying you got a choice, Ruth Colton. You can go back to that saloon and keep living the way you've been living. Keep earning your keep. Keep waiting for Vernon to decide you're old enough for those upstairs rooms. Or what?" Silas stood up and extended his hand. "Or you can come with me. Right now, today, and never go back there again." Ruth stared at his outstretched hand like it was a lifeline thrown into a churning sea. Her whole body trembled. "He'll come after me," she whispered. "He'll bring the sheriff. He'll say I stole from him, or ran away, or let him come. You don't understand. He's got friends. He's got—" "Ruth." Silas kept his hand steady. "I spent 15 years as a Texas Ranger. I faced down outlaws and raiders and worse. I ain't afraid of a saloon keeper with too much greed and not enough conscience." "But why?" The question burst out of her like a dam breaking. "Why would you do this? You don't even know me. I'm nobody. I'm nothing. I'm just—" "You're somebody who needs help," Silas said simply. And I'm somebody who can give it. That's enough." Tears spilled down Ruth's cheeks now, cutting clean tracks through the dirt on her face. She looked at his hand, looked at the door, looked back at his hand. "If I go with you," she said slowly, "he'll say I owe him. He'll say I'm a thief and a runaway and worse. He'll tell everyone I'm no good." "And what do you say?" Ruth thought about that. For the first time in 3 years, someone was asking what she thought, what she wanted, what she said. "I say," she took a shaky breath, "I say I don't want to be scared no more. I say I'm tired of waiting for someone to save me. I say maybe—" She reached out and took his hand. "Maybe I can save myself if somebody just gives me the chance." Silas's weathered fingers closed around hers, and Ruth felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. They didn't make it out of town unseen. Ruth had nothing to gather everything she owned she wore on her back. Vernon hadn't allowed her personal possessions. Said they made her uppity and ungrateful. So they walked straight from the general store to where Silas had left his horse, Ruth's small hand gripping his like she was afraid he'd disappear if she let go. But Vernon Hawkins was watching. He burst out of the Golden Dust's front door just as Silas was helping Ruth onto the buckskin's back, his face purple with rage. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" Silas didn't turn around. "Leaving. With my property." Now Silas turned. His eyes were flat and cold. "That what you call her property?" Vernon stalked toward them, his fists clenched. "That girl owes me $600, Brennan. 600. You think you can just waltz in here and steal what's rightfully mine? I think I can pay off her debt right now." Silas reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather pouch. 600, you said?" Vernon's eyes widened at the sight of the money. His tongue darted out to wet his lips. "Well now, that's mighty generous. But I've been thinking, and I reckon the debt's actually closer to 800. Interest, you understand, cost of doing business." "Fine, 800. And there's emotional damages to consider. My wife, she's grown attached to the girl. Leaving so sudden would just break her heart. Another 200 ought to cover that. $1,000. Plus the inconvenience. Vernon." Silas's voice dropped to that quiet, dangerous register again. "I'm going to count out $1,000. That's more than fair. You're going to take it, and you're going to sign a paper saying Ruth Colton don't owe you nothing more. And then you're going to walk back into that saloon and forget you ever had a niece." "Or what?" Silas stepped closer. "Or I start asking questions, loud questions, in public places, about what exactly happens in those upstairs rooms of yours, about what exactly you had planned for a 15-year-old girl when she turned 16, about what kind of man keeps a ledger book tracking how much a child owes him." Vernon's face went pale. "You ain't got no proof of nothing." "Don't need proof, just need questions. Folks in this town, they're already suspicious of you. All it takes is one person asking the right questions, and suddenly everyone's looking at you different. Suddenly those upstairs rooms ain't so popular anymore. Suddenly the sheriff starts wondering if maybe he ought to take a closer look at your business dealings." Vernon said nothing. His jaw worked silently. $1,000, Silas repeated. "Fair and square. Take it or leave it." The struggle played out across Vernon's face, greed warring with self-preservation. Finally, his shoulders slumped. "Fine, but I want it in writing too. Something saying I treated that girl well, that she's leaving of her own free will, that I ain't responsible for nothing she does from here on out." Done. They completed the transaction right there in the street with the general store clerk as witness. Silas counted out the money slowly, deliberately, making sure Vernon saw every coin. Then they both signed a paper stating that Ruth Colton was free and clear, all debts paid, no further obligations. When it was done, Vernon snatched up the money and turned to go. "You're making a mistake, Brennan," he said over his shoulder. "That girl ain't worth 1,000 pennies, let alone $1,000. She's damaged goods. Broken. You'll see." Ruth flinched at the words, but Silas just shook his head. "Only thing broken here is your soul, Hawkins. Now get gone before I change my mind about letting you keep that money." Vernon disappeared into the saloon without another word. Silas swung up onto the buckskin behind Ruth, his arms coming around her to take the reins. "You all right?" Ruth nodded slowly, then shook her head, then nodded again. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know how to feel. Is this real? Is this actually happening?" "It's real. He just let me go. After 3 years of—" She couldn't finish. Men like Vernon Hawkins, they only understand 2 things, money and fear. I gave him one and reminded him of the other. That's all. But $1,000. That's so much. Why would you— Ruth. Silas clicked his tongue, and the buckskin started walking. "I got money. Ranch has done well. What I ain't got is anyone to spend it on. Eleanor and Thomas, they ain't around to need nothing anymore. So when I saw you in that alley looking at me with those eyes—" He trailed off. "What?" Ruth asked softly. "You looked exactly like Thomas did that last morning. Before the funeral. Like you'd given up hoping anyone would fix things. Like you were just waiting for the next bad thing to happen because that's all you'd ever known." Ruth felt tears threaten again. "I'm sorry about your son, Mr. Brennan." "Silas, and I'm sorry about your folks. Reckon we got plenty of sorrow between us to fill an ocean. What happens now?" Silas guided the horse toward the edge of town, leaving Dusty Creek and its gilded saloons and its broken promises behind. "Now we go home," he said simply, "and we start figuring out how to be a family." The sun was setting by the time they crested the final hill. Ruth had been silent for most of the ride, overwhelmed by the vastness of the land around her, by the strange reality of her sudden freedom. But when she saw the ranch spread out in the valley below the sturdy house with its wide porch, the solid barn, the cattle grazing peacefully in fenced pastures, she drew in a sharp breath. "This is yours. This is ours, if you want it to be." Ruth turned to look at him, and Silas saw something new in her eyes. Not hope, not yet. Hope took time to rebuild, but maybe the first tiny seed of it planted in soil that had been barren for far too long. "I want it," she whispered, "more than anything I've ever wanted in my whole life." Silas nodded, guiding the horse down the hill toward home. Behind them, the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, and somewhere in the distance, a mockingbird sang its evening song. It wasn't a happy ending. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of one. Ruth couldn't sleep that first night. The bed was too soft. The room was too quiet. The absence of drunken laughter and creaking floorboards and Vernon's heavy footsteps felt wrong somehow, like her body had forgotten what safety felt like. She lay staring at the ceiling, waiting for the trick to reveal itself. Around midnight, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Her whole body went rigid. Her hands curled into fists beneath the quilt. The footsteps stopped outside her door. Ruth held her breath. "Ruth!" Silas's voice low and careful. "You awake?" She didn't answer at first. Couldn't. Her throat had closed up with old fear. "I ain't coming in," he continued. "Just wanted you to know there's warm milk on the stove if you can't sleep. And the door locks from the inside. You're safe here." The footsteps retreated. Ruth lay there for a long moment, her heart hammering. Then slowly she climbed out of bed and crossed to the door. Her fingers found the lock, a simple iron bolt, sturdy and real. She slid it home. The click echoed through the quiet room, and for the first time in 3 years, Ruth Colton cried herself to sleep, knowing no one could reach her. Morning came harsh and bright. Ruth woke to the smell of bacon frying and coffee brewing scents, so foreign to her experience that for a moment she thought she was dreaming. At the Golden Dust breakfast had been cold porridge eaten standing up, shoveled down between chores. She dressed quickly in the same torn dress, it was all she had, and ventured out into the main room. Silas stood at the stove looking awkward and out of place with a spatula in his hand. "Morning," he said without turning around. "You hungry?" "Yes, sir." "Don't call me sir. Makes me feel old." "You are old." The words slipped out before Ruth could stop them. She clapped a hand over her mouth, horrified. But Silas just laughed, a rusty sound like machinery that hadn't been used in years. "Fair point. Sit down before these eggs burn." They ate in silence, at first Ruth too overwhelmed by the simple abundance of food to speak. Bacon, eggs, fresh bread with butter, a glass of actual milk instead of watered-down whatever Vernon had grudgingly provided. "Slow down," Silas said gently. "Ain't nobody gonna take it from you." Ruth forced herself to chew more carefully, even though every instinct screamed at her to eat as fast as possible before the food disappeared. "I'm sorry," she mumbled around a mouthful of bread. "I don't mean to be—" "Don't apologize. Just eat." Halfway through this meal, the front door burst open. Ruth nearly fell off her chair. Her plate clattered against the table. She was already calculating escape routes, the window, the back door, anywhere Vernon couldn't reach her. "Silas Brennan, you stubborn fool." A woman's voice. Sharp and exasperated, and nothing like Willa's poisonous sweetness. Ruth froze. The woman who stormed into the kitchen was perhaps 50, with steel-gray hair pinned back severely and eyes that missed nothing. She wore a practical brown dress and carried a basket over one arm. "Clara," Silas said flatly. "Knocking's still a custom in these parts." "You don't get to talk about customs when you—" Clara stopped mid-tirade, her gaze landing on Ruth. "Oh." Ruth shrank back instinctively. "Oh, Silas." Clara breathed, her whole demeanor softening. "She's just a child." "Clara. This is Ruth. Ruth, this is my sister Clara. She teaches at the schoolhouse in town and has no understanding of personal boundaries." "I have plenty of understanding. I just choose to ignore them where you're concerned." Clara set her basket on the table and crouched down to Ruth's eye level. "Hello, sweetheart. I heard what my brother did yesterday. The whole town's buzzing about it." Ruth's stomach dropped. "They are, Vernon Hawkins has been telling anyone who'll listen that Silas kidnapped you. Stole you right out of his caring arms. Said you're confused and manipulated and need to be returned to your rightful family." "That's a lie. I know it is, honey. Everyone with half a brain knows it is. But Vernon's got friends, and those friends have influence, and—" Clara straightened up, fixing Silas with a hard stare. "And you should have told me what you were planning before the whole county started choosing sides." "Wasn't planning anything. Just happened." "Just happened. You spent $1,000 on a girl you'd never met, and it just happened." "Pretty much." Clara threw her hands up. "You're impossible. You know that, absolutely impossible." "You've mentioned it once or twice." Despite the tension, Ruth felt something loosen in her chest. This wasn't the cold, calculated cruelty she'd grown used to. This was family, real family bickering, because they cared, not because they wanted to wound. Clara turned back to her eyes softening again. "I brought some things. Dresses that might fit you, some books, a few other necessities. We'll need to get you properly outfitted, but this should do for now." "You brought me clothes?" "Well, I wasn't going to let you run around in that rag Vernon kept you in, was I?" Clara's voice cracked slightly. "That man. That absolute monster. If anyone had known what was really happening in that saloon." "It's all right, ma'am." "It is not all right. Don't you ever say it's all right when someone hurts you, Ruth. It's never all right." Clara took a deep breath, visibly composing herself. "Now, have you eaten enough? Good. Let's get you cleaned up and into something decent while my idiot brother figures out how to handle the mess he's made." "I didn't make any mess," Silas protested. "You made $1,000 mess, Silas. The whole town's talking. Sheriff Morrison's already been asking questions, and Vernon—" Clara's expression darkened. "Vernon's been talking to Judge Thornton." Ruth felt the blood drain from her face. "Judge Thornton signed the papers giving me to Vernon and Aunt Prudence 3 years ago. He said it was for my own good." Silas and Clara exchanged a look that Ruth couldn't quite read. "That's complicated," Clara said carefully. "What's complicated about it?" "Judge Thornton and Vernon Hawkins play cards together every Thursday night," Silas said flatly. "Have for years. Thornton's also a silent partner in the Golden Dust." The implications hit Ruth like a physical blow. "So when they gave me to Vernon?" "Can't prove nothing," Silas continued. "But yeah, I got my suspicions about how that guardianship got decided." Ruth's hands started shaking. She pressed them flat against the table to make them stop. "So he'll get me back," she whispered. "The judge will say I have to go back and there's nothing anyone can do, and—" "Hey." Clara's hand covered hers warm and steady. "Nobody's taking you anywhere. You hear me? My brother's a lot of things. Stubborn, pig-headed, emotionally constipated. Standing right here, Clara. But he's never broken a promise in his life. He said you're safe here, and that means you're safe. We'll figure out the rest." Ruth wanted to believe her, wanted it so badly she could taste it. But 3 years of Vernon's cruelty had taught her that hope was just another way to get hurt. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of new experiences. Clara came by every morning to work with Ruth on her reading and writing skills. Vernon had actively discouraged, claiming educated women were unnatural and asking for trouble. Ruth discovered she loved books with a ferocity that surprised her. She devoured everything Clara brought: novels, poetry, history texts, reading by lamplight until her eyes burned. "You're a natural," Clara told her one afternoon, watching Ruth sound out a particularly difficult passage. "Your mother taught you well." "Mama always said books were freedom." Ruth's voice caught. "She said as long as I could read, nobody could keep me ignorant. Vernon hated that. He burned all my books the first month I was there. He burned them. Said I didn't need them anymore. Said I had new lessons to learn." Ruth's jaw tightened. "I learned them, just not the ones he wanted." Clara didn't ask what those lessons were. She didn't need to. Silas taught Ruth other things, practical things. How to saddle a horse without getting kicked. How to tell a good calf from a sick one. How to mend fence and read weather signs and find water in dry country. "Why are you teaching me all this?" Ruth asked one evening, wiping sweat from her forehead after her first successful ride. "Because knowing things makes you strong," Silas said simply. "And strong people don't need to depend on anybody else to survive. Vernon always said women couldn't learn ranch work. Said our brains weren't built for it. Vernon's an idiot." Ruth laughed a real laugh, one that surprised both of them. It felt strange in her throat, like a muscle she'd forgotten she had. Silas smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "That's the first time I've heard you laugh. It's the first time I've had something to laugh about." But the peace couldn't last. Ruth knew that, had known it from the beginning, even as she'd desperately hoped otherwise. Vernon Hawkins came for her on a Tuesday. Ruth was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard horses approaching. 3 of them. She looked up, and her blood turned to ice. Vernon rode in front, his face arranged in that false, pleasant expression she knew so well. Behind him came Aunt Prudence, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. And beside them, Sheriff Morrison. "Ruth," Silas's voice rang out from the porch. "Get inside." She ran. By the time she reached the house, Silas was already standing at the top of the porch steps, his rifle in his hands. Not pointed at anyone. Just there. A statement of fact. "That's far enough, Vernon. Now, Silas, let's not be hasty." Vernon raised his hands in a placating gesture. "We're just here to talk. Like civilized folks." "Civilized folks don't need the sheriff to have a conversation." Sheriff Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Silas, I don't want any trouble, but Vernon's got legitimate concerns here. The girl's his legal ward. Court-appointed. He's got papers." "I've got papers too, signed by Vernon himself, saying Ruth's debts are paid and she's free to go." "That document was obtained under duress," Vernon cut in smoothly. "You threatened me, Brennan, in front of witnesses. Any judge would throw that paper out." "I didn't threaten you. I stated facts. You implied you'd ruin my reputation if I didn't hand over my niece. Reputation. Ruth couldn't stop herself. She stepped out onto the porch, her whole body trembling with a rage she'd never allowed herself to feel before. What reputation? The one where you beat a child. The one where you made me sleep in a closet and work 16 hours a day. The one where you were going to sell me to... Ruth! Prudence's voice cracked like a whip. That is enough. You will apologize immediately for spreading such vile lies about the family that took you in out of the goodness of... You don't have any goodness. Ruth's voice rose to a shout. You watched him hit me. You watched and you did nothing. You're not my family. You're monsters. Prudence's face went white, then red. You see, Sheriff. You see how she's been corrupted. This man has turned her against the only family she has left. He's filled her head with lies and... I haven't lied about anything, Silas said quietly. And Ruth hasn't either. But I expect you both know that. Vernon's pleasant mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold fury beneath. This isn't over, Brennan. I've already spoken to Judge Thornton. He's agreed to review the custody arrangement. I'm sure he has. Ruth belongs with her rightful family. The law's on our side. The law. Silas stepped forward, placing himself between Vernon and Ruth. You keep talking about the law like it means something, but we both know what you planned for that girl. We both know what those upstairs rooms were for. And I promise you, if you try to take her back, the whole territory will know it too. You can't prove anything. Maybe not. But I can sure make people ask questions, loud questions. The kind that get printed in newspapers and repeated in church pews and whispered in general stores. The kind that follow a man around for the rest of his miserable life. Vernon's face twisted with hatred. You'll regret this. I regret a lot of things. Saving that girl ain't one of them. Sheriff Morrison cleared his throat. Look, this is getting us nowhere. Vernon, Silas, why don't we let the judge sort this out proper and legal? Thornton set a hearing for next week. Until then, Ruth stays where she is. That's not acceptable, Vernon snapped. It's what's happening. I'm not dragging a 15-year-old girl off this property at gunpoint. Not today. Not ever. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Vernon yanked his horse's reins, turning the animal roughly. 1 week, he said. Enjoy it while it lasts, Ruth. Because when that judge rules in our favor, and you're coming home. And I promise you, girl, you will learn the meaning of gratitude. He rode off without looking back. Prudence followed her face, a mask of righteous indignation. Morrison lingered for a moment longer. I'm sorry about this, Silas. I know Vernon's no good, but my hands are tied. Are they? The sheriff flinched at the question, but didn't answer. He just touched his hat brim and rode away. Ruth stood on the porch watching the dust settle, feeling like the ground had opened up beneath her feet. He's going to get me back. Her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. The judge is his friend. I don't have any proof of what he did. It'll be my word against his, and I'm just a girl and nobody believes girls and... Ruth. Silas's hand landed on her shoulder, not grabbing, just resting there. Warm and solid and real. I made you a promise. Promises don't mean anything. Not when there's money and power and... My promises mean something. He turned her to face him, his weathered hands gentle on her shoulders. I lost my son, Ruth. I lost my wife. I lost everything I thought mattered. And then I found you beaten and broken and still fighting, still surviving. Do you know what that told me? Ruth shook her head, tears blurring her vision. It told me that God wasn't done with me yet. That maybe, just maybe, I was put on this earth for a reason, and maybe that reason is standing right in front of me. I'm not worth all this trouble, Ruth whispered. I'm nobody. You're my daughter. The words came out rough and fierce. Maybe not by blood, but by choice, and I will burn this whole territory down before I let anyone hurt you again. Ruth stared at him through her tears, seeing not the grieving widower she'd met in that alley, but something else entirely. A father. Her father. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice breaking. I know, but you ain't alone anymore, and that makes all the difference. Clara arrived an hour later, her expression grim. I talked to Dr. Walker, she said without preamble. He's willing to testify that Ruth was malnourished and showed signs of physical abuse when he examined her last week. That's something, Silas said. It's not enough. Thornton's already made up his mind. Half the town saw Vernon counting Silas's money. They think this was a business transaction. Rich rancher buys a girl from her family. It doesn't look good. I don't care how it looks. I care about what it is. That's the problem, Silas. You've never cared how things look, but in a courtroom, perception is everything. Ruth sat at the kitchen table, listening to them argue about her future, like she wasn't even there. It was familiar. Vernon and Prudence had done the same thing countless times. Decided what she'd eat, what she'd wear, what she'd do. Never once asking what she wanted. But this was different. These people were fighting for her, not against her. What if I testified? She asked quietly. Clara and Silas both turned to look at her. If I stood up in front of the judge and told him everything. Everything Vernon did, everything he was planning. Maybe. It's your word against his, Clara said gently. And Thornton's already shown whose side he's on. But at least people would hear. At least they'd know. Ruth lifted her chin, and for the first time since that morning, she felt something other than fear. I've been silent for 3 years. Scared, and silent, and invisible. Maybe it's time to stop being invisible. Silas looked at her with something like pride in his eyes. That's your choice to make, he said. Not mine, not Clara's, yours. Then I choose to fight. Ruth's voice didn't waver. I choose to tell the truth, even if nobody believes me. I choose to stop being scared. Clara reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You remind me of Eleanor, she said softly. Silas's wife. She had that same fire, that same stubbornness. Is that a good thing? Clara smiled through suddenly bright eyes. It's the best thing, the very best thing. That night, Ruth couldn't sleep again. But this time it wasn't fear keeping her awake. It was determination. She climbed out of bed and padded to the window, looking out at the moonlit ranch that had become her home. Somewhere out there, Vernon Hawkins was plotting to take it all away. Somewhere out there, a corrupt judge was ready to hand her back to her abusers. But somewhere out there, too, were people who'd chosen to stand beside her. People who saw her not as property or burden or damaged goods, but as family. Tomorrow she would tell Clara about the other girls. The ones Vernon had bought and sold before her. The ones who'd disappeared into those upstairs rooms and never been seen again. Tomorrow she would give them a weapon Vernon didn't know existed. Tomorrow she would fight. But tonight, Ruth Colton pressed her hand against the cold window glass and made herself a promise. Whatever happened in that courtroom, she would never be invisible again. Ruth told Clara everything the next morning. About the girls who'd come before her. About the ones Vernon had brought to the Golden Dust, with the same promises he'd made to her shelter food family. About how they'd disappeared one by one, sold off to men who paid cash for things no decent person should buy. There was a girl named Lily. Ruth said, her voice steady despite the horror of what she was describing. She was 14, pretty, red hair. Vernon kept her for 6 months, and then one night she just wasn't there anymore. When I asked Aunt Prudence what happened, she slapped me and told me to mind my own business. Clara's face had gone pale. How many girls, Ruth? 3 that I know of. But I heard Vernon talking once late at night when he thought I was asleep. He said something about his arrangements going back years. Said I was his best investment yet because I was docile and didn't ask questions. And nobody ever reported this. Who would they report it to? Sheriff Morrison. He drinks at Vernon's saloon every Friday night. Judge Thornton. He's practically Vernon's business partner. Ruth's jaw tightened. The whole town's rotten, Miss Clara. The good folks just look the other way because it's easier than fighting." Clara stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I need to talk to Silas. Right now." She found him in the barn mending a saddle. The moment she told him what Ruth had said, the leather strap snapped in his hands. "3 girls," he said quietly. "At least 3. Maybe more. Ruth doesn't know for certain. And nobody did a damn thing." Nobody knew Silas. Or if they knew, they convinced themselves it wasn't their problem. Silas's hands were shaking. He'd seen terrible things in his years as a ranger, massacres, murders, cruelties that haunted his nightmares. But this was different. This was evil, wearing a respectable face hiding in plain sight while the whole town pretended not to see. "We can't prove any of this in court," Clara continued. "Ruth's testimony alone won't be enough. Thornton will dismiss it as the ravings of an ungrateful child. Then we need evidence. Where do you expect to find evidence? Vernon's not stupid. He covers his tracks." Silas looked toward the house where Ruth sat on the porch with a book in her lap. Even from here he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing toward the road waiting for danger to appear. "Maybe he's not as careful as he thinks," Silas said slowly. "Ruth mentioned a ledger, a book where Vernon kept track of her debt. If he did the same thing with the other girls, that ledger would be in the saloon, which is Vernon's territory. Then we need someone on the inside." Clara stared at him. "You're not seriously suggesting—" "I ain't suggesting anything, just thinking out loud. Silas Brennan, if you're planning something illegal, I'm planning to protect my daughter." He met his sister's eyes, and she saw something in them she hadn't seen since before Eleanor died. Purpose. Whatever it takes. Dr. Henry Walker arrived at the ranch that afternoon, his medical bag in hand and worry etched across his weathered face. "I came as soon as I heard about the hearing," he said, accepting the coffee Clara offered. "This whole situation has gotten out of control." "You're willing to testify about Ruth's condition?" Silas asked. "Of course. But I have to warn you, my testimony alone won't convince Thornton. The man's already made up his mind." "What if you had more than Ruth's injuries to report?" Walker hesitated. "What do you mean?" "Ruth told us about other girls. Girls who disappeared from the golden dust over the years. You've been the only doctor in town for decades, Henry. You must have seen something." The doctor's face went gray. His coffee cup rattled against its saucer. "I've suspected," he said finally. "There were girls who came through my office injuries consistent with abuse, malnourishment, signs of other things. But they'd never talk. Always claimed they fell or hurt themselves, or it was an accident." "And you let it go. What was I supposed to do?" Walker's voice cracked. "Report my suspicions to Morrison. To Thornton, they'd have buried it and run me out of town. I'm a doctor, Silas, not a lawman. I heal people. I don't have the power to—" "You have power now." Silas leaned forward. "Write down everything you remember. Every girl, every injury, every suspicious case that walked through your door. We'll use it to show the court that Ruth isn't lying, that there's a pattern here. Even if I do that, Thornton will find a way to dismiss it. Then we won't give him the chance." Walker looked confused, but Clara understood immediately. Her eyes widened. "Silas, no." "No what?" "You're planning to go over Thornton's head, to the territorial governor." Silas didn't deny it. "Ruth said the whole town's rotten. Fine. Then we go outside the town. Governor Safford's a decent man. If we can get this story to him before the hearing's in 5 days. We'll never make it to Prescott and back in time. I know people who can. Riders from my ranger days. Good men who owe me favors. And if Safford doesn't believe you, if he decides it's not worth his time—" Silas looked toward the porch again. Ruth had set down her book and was watching them through the window, her blue eyes full of questions she was too afraid to ask. "Then at least I'll know I tried everything." That night, Silas wrote 3 letters. One to former Captain James Montgomery of the Texas Rangers, a man who'd once told Silas he'd ride through hellfire if asked. One to Territorial Governor Anson Safford, outlining the situation in careful, damning detail. And one to Vernon Hawkins. Clara found the third letter on his desk and read it with growing horror. "You can't send this." "Already planning to. You're threatening to expose him publicly if he doesn't withdraw his custody claim. That's blackmail, Silas. It's leverage. It's illegal." Silas took the letter from her hands, folding it carefully. "So is selling children to the highest bidder. But Vernon's been doing that for years and nobody's stopped him. Sometimes, Clara, you have to fight dirty to beat people who've never fought clean. And if he calls your bluff, then it ain't a bluff." Clara stared at her brother, seeing the man he'd become in the years since Eleanor's death. Hard, uncompromising, willing to burn everything down for the people he loved. "You're going to start a war," she said quietly. "War started the day Vernon Hawkins laid hands on that girl. I'm just finishing it." The letter reached Vernon the following morning. Ruth was helping Clara hang laundry when they heard the horse approaching. Fast. Too fast. She dropped the shirt she was holding and ran toward the house, her heart hammering. Vernon Hawkins dismounted before his horse had fully stopped. His face was purple with rage, the veins in his neck bulging as he stormed toward the porch. "Brennan, get out here, you son of a—" Silas appeared in the doorway, rifle in hand. "That's far enough. You think you can threaten me?" Vernon waved the letter in his fist. "You think a few fancy words are going to scare me into backing down?" "Ain't trying to scare you, Vernon, just stating facts." "Facts? You want facts." Vernon's laugh was ugly, desperate. "Here's a fact for you. Judge Thornton's moving up the hearing. Tomorrow morning. And when he rules in my favor, I'm going to have the sheriff arrest you for kidnapping, extortion, and anything else I can think of. Tomorrow. Surprised? Don't be. You're not the only one who can pull strings, Brennan. The difference is, my strings actually work." Ruth stepped out onto the porch, positioning herself beside Silas. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "I won't go back with you." Vernon's eyes found her, and for just a moment the mask slipped completely. Pure hatred twisted his features. "You don't get a choice, girl." "Everyone has a choice. That's what Silas taught me." "Silas taught you?" Vernon spat on the ground. "What did he teach you, huh? How to spread lies about the family that saved you. How to bite the hand that fed you. You didn't save me, you bought me, and I'm done being owned." Vernon took a step forward. Silas raised his rifle. "I said that's far enough." "You're making a mistake, Brennan, a big one. You think I don't have insurance? You think I haven't prepared for this?" "What's that supposed to mean?" Vernon's smile was cruel and knowing. "Ask your sister what her husband used to do for me, before he died. Ask her about the money he borrowed, the debts that got passed down when his heart gave out." Clara went white. "That's right." Vernon's voice dripped with satisfaction. "Your precious sister's been in my pocket for years. Who do you think convinced Dr. Walker to keep quiet all this time? Who do you think warned me when people got too curious?" "That's a lie?" Clara whispered. "I never—" "Your husband did. Same thing. And his debts became yours when he passed." Vernon spread his hands. "See, Brennan, I've got hooks in everyone. The whole town. You can't fight that. You can't beat that. All you can do is hand over the girl and walk away while you still can." Silas looked at his sister, saw the guilt written across her face, the shame, the horror. "Clara, I didn't know." Her voice cracked. "I swear, Silas, I paid off Robert's debts years ago. I thought it was just money. I never knew what Vernon was using it for. I never knew about the girls." "But you knew something was wrong." "I suspected." Clara's shoulders slumped. "I saw things, heard things, but I looked the other way because it was easier, because I was scared." "Everyone's scared," Vernon said smugly. That's how I win. Ruth watched this unfold with growing understanding. This was how it worked. How it had always worked. Fear spreading like poison, turning good people into accomplices, making everyone complicit in evil they didn't want to face. And suddenly she wasn't afraid anymore. Mr. Hawkins? Vernon turned to her, irritation flickering across his face. What? I remember Lily's last name now. Miller. Lily Miller. Her father was a miner who died in a cave-in. You told everyone she went to live with relatives in California. Vernon's eyes narrowed. So, I also remember Mary Sullivan, and Jenny Hawkins. That was your own cousin's daughter, wasn't it? The one everyone said ran off with a traveling salesman. Shut up. I remember the dates too. The nights they disappeared. The men who visited the saloon before they vanished. Ruth's voice grew stronger with each word. I remember everything, Mr. Hawkins. Every girl, every lie, every scream I heard through thin walls while you told me to mind my own business. Vernon's face had gone pale. You're lying. You don't know anything. I know what you were planning for me. I know about the man from El Paso who offered you $2,000 for a clean girl with no family. I heard you discussing it with Aunt Prudence. You were going to wait until my 16th birthday, weren't you? Make it seem more respectable. You little... Vernon lunged toward the porch. Three things happened at once. Silas stepped forward, rifle raised. Clara screamed her brother's name. And a gunshot split the air. Everyone froze. The shot hadn't come from Silas's rifle. It had come from the road where three riders had appeared on the crest of the hill. The lead rider lowered his smoking pistol, aiming it directly at Vernon's chest. That was a warning shot, called out a voice Ruth didn't recognize. Next one won't be. Vernon spun around, his face contorting with confusion and fear. Who the hell are you? The rider urged his horse forward, and as he drew closer, Ruth saw the badge pinned to his vest. Not a town sheriff's star, something else. Something that carried authority far beyond Dusty Creek. Name's Captain James Montgomery, United States Marshal. He nodded toward the two men flanking him. We're here on authority of the territorial governor. Silas lowered his rifle, a strange expression crossing his face. Jim, you got my letter. Got it yesterday. Rode through the night. Montgomery dismounted, his eyes never leaving Vernon. Governor Safford sends his regards. Also sends his strong recommendation that any custody hearing scheduled for tomorrow be postponed indefinitely pending investigation. Investigation into what? Vernon's voice had gone shrill. This is a family matter. You've got no jurisdiction. I've got jurisdiction over human trafficking. Montgomery pulled a folded document from his coat. Got 3 witnesses willing to testify about girls being sold out of the Golden Dust Saloon. Got bank records showing payments to Judge Thornton that'll make real interesting reading for the newspapers. And got a sworn statement from a former employee of yours who's decided to talk. Former employee, your wife. Montgomery smiled grimly. Prudence Hawkins rode into Prescott 2 days ago. Said she couldn't live with what you'd made her do anymore. Said she'd rather hang than spend another night pretending to be something she isn't. Vernon's face crumpled. All the bluster, all the confidence, all the careful cultivation of power and fear gone in an instant. Prudence wouldn't, he whispered. She wouldn't dare. She dared. And when she started talking, so did others. Turns out your hooks ain't as deep as you thought, Hawkins. People were just waiting for someone else to go first. Vernon took a step backward, then another. His eyes darted toward his horse, calculating escape routes. Don't, Montgomery warned. My men will run you down before you get a mile. Make this easy on yourself. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Vernon Hawkins broke. He fell to his knees in the dirt, all the fight draining out of him. He looked old suddenly. Small. Nothing like the monster who had haunted Ruth's nightmares for 3 years. I want a lawyer, he croaked. You'll get one, after you're locked up. Montgomery gestured to his deputies. Take him, and search the saloon. I want that ledger the girl mentioned. As the deputies hauled Vernon to his feet, Ruth stepped off the porch. Wait. Everyone turned to look at her. She walked toward Vernon, slowly stopping just out of arm's reach. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Look at me." He didn't move. "I said look at me." Slowly, Vernon raised his head. His eyes were wet with self-pity, with rage, with the desperate calculation of a man whose empire had crumbled. "I want you to remember this moment," Ruth said quietly. "I want you to remember what it feels like when the person you hurt refuses to stay broken. When the girl you tried to sell stands up and tells the truth anyway." "You're nothing," Vernon spat. "You're trash. You'll always be." "I'm Ruth Colton, daughter of Margaret and Thomas Colton. I'm 15 years old. I survived you, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure no other girl has to." She turned her back on him, the most powerful gesture she could make, and walked back to the porch where Silas waited. Behind her, Vernon screamed curses as the deputies dragged him toward their horses. But Ruth didn't look back. She was done looking back. Silas caught her in his arms as her legs finally gave out. 3 years of terror. 3 years of survival. 3 years of waiting for this moment. It all came crashing down at once. "I've got you," Silas murmured into her hair. "I've got you, daughter. You're safe now. You're finally safe." Ruth clung to him and wept. Not tears of fear, not tears of pain, tears of release. Because for the first time in her life, she actually believed him. The days following Vernon's arrest passed in a blur of questions and depositions, and strangers asking Ruth to relive the worst years of her life. Marshal Montgomery set up his investigation in the town's small church, the only building big enough to hold all the people who suddenly wanted to talk. And there were many. Once Vernon Hawkins was safely behind bars, the citizens of Dusty Creek discovered their courage in droves. "I always suspected something was wrong," said Mrs. Patterson, the schoolteacher wringing her hands. "Those girls who came and went. The way Vernon looked at them. But what could I do? A woman alone against a man like that." "I saw bruises on Ruth more than once," admitted the general store clerk. "But she always said she fell." "What was I supposed to think?" "We all knew," muttered old Pete Williams, the blacksmith. "Deep down we all knew. We just didn't want to see." Ruth listened to these confessions from her seat in the front pew, Silas solid and steady beside her. Each admission of guilt, each excuse for inaction, each tearful apology, they washed over her like waves against stone. She didn't forgive them. She wasn't sure she ever would. But she understood. Fear was a powerful thing. It made cowards of good people and monsters of weak ones. On the third day, Prudence Hawkins was brought before her. Ruth hadn't known what to expect from this meeting. Her aunt had been a shadow in her childhood nightmares, silent, complicit, occasionally cruel, when Vernon wasn't watching. But the woman who sat across from her now looked nothing like the painted vulture Ruth remembered. Prudence had aged a decade in a week. Her hair hung limp and unwashed. Her face, free of powder and rouge, was pale and drawn. Her eyes, when they met Ruth's, held something Ruth had never seen in them before. Shame. "I don't expect you to forgive me." Prudence said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What I did, what I let happen, there's no forgiveness for that." Ruth said nothing. She wasn't going to make this easy. "I want you to know, I didn't always hate you. When your mother died, part of me wanted to love you, to raise you right. But Vernon—" Prudence's voice cracked. "He had plans, from the very beginning, and I was too scared to stop him. So you helped him instead." "Yes." The word came out like a confession of murder. "I helped him. I looked away. I told myself it wasn't my fault, that I was just surviving. But I know what I am. I know what I became." "Why did you finally talk?" Prudence's hands twisted in her lap. "When Vernon started talking about your 16th birthday, about the man from El Paso, I realized he was going to do it again. The same thing he did to Lily, to Mary, to all of them. And I couldn't—" She choked on a sob. I couldn't watch another girl disappear. Not you. You reminded me too much of your mother. My mother. Margaret was beautiful. Brave. She married for love even when everyone told her she could do better. She believed in things and goodness in people. Vernon hated that about her. Said she made me feel inferior. Ruth felt something crack in her chest. You were jealous of my mother. I was jealous of everything about her, her happiness, her husband, her daughter. Prudence met her eyes. I told myself I deserved what she had. I told myself taking you was justice, but all I did was destroy the only piece of her left in this world. The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of pain and betrayal. What do you want from me? Ruth finally asked. Forgiveness? Absolution. No, I want you to know that I'm going to tell them everything. Every girl, every name, every man who paid Vernon for the privilege. Prudence's jaw tightened with sudden resolve. The marshal says I'll probably hang for what I've done. And that's fair, that's right. But before I go, I'm going to make sure every single person involved goes down with me. Ruth studied her aunt's face, searching for the trick, the manipulation, the hidden cruelty. She found only exhaustion, and something that might have been redemption if it wasn't too little too late. Good, Ruth said quietly. Make it count. She stood and walked away without looking back. Silas was waiting outside the church, his hat in his hands. How'd it go? Ruth considered the question. She's going to testify against everyone, even herself. That took courage? No. Ruth shook her head slowly. That took guilt. She's not brave. She's just tired of being a monster. Silas didn't argue. He just fell into step beside her as they walked toward the ranch. Marshal Montgomery wants to talk to you again tomorrow, he said. Something about the ledger they found. What about it? Apparently it goes back further than anyone thought. Names, dates, amounts. Vernon kept records of everything he ever did. Silas's voice tightened, including payments to Judge Thornton. Ruth stopped walking. So the judge was in on it from the beginning. He's been arrested too. The whole system's coming apart. Good. It was a strange feeling, Ruth realized, this hollow satisfaction that kept washing over her. She dreamed of this moment for years, Vernon exposed, punished, destroyed. But now that it was happening, she felt mostly empty. Is this what justice feels like? She asked quietly. Silas considered the question. I don't know. Maybe justice is just the absence of injustice. Maybe it's not supposed to feel good. It doesn't feel good. It just feels necessary. That might be enough. They walked in silence for a while longer before Ruth spoke again. What happens to me now, after all this is over? What do you mean? I mean legally. Vernon was my guardian. Now he's going to prison. Aunt Prudence, too. I don't have any family left. The court will have to put me somewhere. Silas stopped walking and turned to face her. Ruth, you have family. I know you want to keep me. But wanting something and having the legal right to it. I spoke to Marshal Montgomery this morning. He's arranging for official adoption papers. Governor Safford's agreed to expedite them given the circumstances. Ruth's heart stuttered. Adoption. If you want it. If you want me. Silas's voice was gruff the way it always got when he was feeling more than he could express. I know I ain't much. Old widower with a failing ranch and too much grief. But I meant what I said before. You're my daughter. Has been since the day I found you in that alley. You're not failing, Ruth whispered. And you're not old. Well, maybe a little old. Silas laughed, that rusty, unused sound she'd learned to love. Brat. Stubborn fool. Learned it from you. Ruth felt tears pricking at her eyes, but these were different. Warm. Clean. The kind of tears that came from too much feeling, not too much pain. Yes, she said. Yes, what? Yes, I want you to adopt me. Yes, I want to be your daughter. Yes, I want this to be my home forever. Silas pulled her into his arms, and Ruth buried her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of horses and tobacco, and something she was just beginning to recognize as safety. Forever's a long time, he murmured into her hair. I know. That's why I'm sure. Clara found them still standing in the road 10 minutes later, hugging like the world might end if they let go. Well, she said, a smile tugging at her lips. I take it the conversation went well. Ruth pulled back, wiping her eyes. He's adopting me. I know. I helped him fill out the paperwork. Clara's smile widened. Welcome to the family, niece. Officially. Does this mean I have to call you Aunt Clara? Only if you want to, though I reserve the right to call you my favorite niece regardless. I'm your only niece. That's why you're my favorite. The laughter that followed felt strange and wonderful and absolutely necessary. But the peace didn't last. It never did, Ruth was learning. 2 days before the adoption was set to be finalized, a stranger rode into Dusty Creek. Ruth was at the general store with Clara picking out fabric for new dresses when she saw him through the window. Tall, well-dressed, riding a horse that cost more than most ranches earned in a year. Something about him made her skin prickle with unease. Who's that? She asked, nudging Clara. Clara's face had gone pale. I don't know, but I don't like the look of him. They watched as the stranger dismounted and walked directly toward the church where Marshal Montgomery had set up his headquarters. His stride was confident, purposeful, like a man who knew exactly what he wanted and intended to get it. An hour later, Silas came to find them. His face was grim. We need to go home, he said. Now. What's wrong? Clara demanded. Who was that man? His name is Edward Colton. He's Ruth's uncle, her father's brother. Ruth felt the blood drain from her face. My father didn't have a brother. He did. A half-brother from your grandfather's first marriage. They were estranged, hadn't spoken in 20 years. Silas's jaw tightened. Until now. What does he want? Silas looked at her with eyes full of something Ruth recognized. Fear. He wants you. Edward Colton came to the ranch that evening accompanied by Marshal Montgomery and a lawyer Ruth had never seen before. I don't understand, Ruth said, her voice rising. I never even knew he existed. Why would he want custody of me now? Edward Colton smiled. It was a polished smile, practiced in boardrooms and courtrooms designed to reassure and manipulate in equal measure. My dear niece, I only recently learned of your existence. Your father and I were estranged. A family disagreement that should never have gone as far as it did. When I heard what happened to Thomas, your father, and his wife, I was devastated. And when I discovered that you'd survived, that you'd been suffering under the care of those monsters. He shook his head sorrowfully. I came as soon as I could. That was 3 years ago. I didn't know. The news never reached San Francisco. It wasn't until one of my business associates mentioned the scandal in Arizona territory that I realized I had a niece who needed me. I don't need you. I have a family. Edward's smile flickered, just for a moment. Mr. Brennan has been very kind to you, I'm sure, but he's not blood, and blood, my dear, is everything. Blood didn't save me from Vernon Hawkins. Blood didn't feed me or clothe me or protect me. Silas did. Silas Brennan is a stranger who purchased you from your guardians like livestock at auction. Edward's voice hardened. Whatever his intentions, that's how the law sees it. And the law gives blood relatives priority in matters of custody. Ruth looked at Marshal Montgomery, desperation rising in her chest. Tell me he can't do this. Tell me there's some way. Montgomery's face was apologetic. I'm sorry, Ruth. Mr. Colton's claim is legitimate. He's your closest living relative. The court has to consider his petition. Consider it or grant it? That depends on the judge. Which judge? Silas asked quietly. He'd been silent until now, standing in the corner with his arms crossed and his face unreadable. Judge Abraham Mercer, from Tucson. He's been assigned to replace Thornton. Abe Mercer. Something shifted in Silas's expression. I know him. Then you know he's fair, Montgomery said. He'll hear both sides. Make a decision based on what's best for Ruth. And what if what's best for Ruth is staying here? Silas stepped forward, positioning himself between Edward and Ruth. What if the girl herself tells the judge she wants nothing to do with this man? Edward's polished smile returned. I'm sure Ruth is confused. She's been through a terrible ordeal, but with time, with proper care, with family. I have family, Ruth interrupted. Right here, the only family that matters. You're a child. You don't know what's best for you. I know what's not best for me, and that's leaving with someone I've never met just because we share blood. Edward's mask slipped for just a moment. Ruth saw something flash in his eyes. Irritation, calculation, cold assessment. Then it was gone, replaced by wounded concern. I see I have my work cut out for me. He turned to Montgomery. When is the hearing? 3 days. Excellent. That should be plenty of time. Edward tipped his hat toward Ruth. I look forward to getting to know you better, niece. I'm sure once you understand who I am, you'll see things differently. He left without waiting for a response. The moment his horse disappeared down the road, Ruth turned to Silas. He's lying. I don't know about what yet, but he's lying. I know. How can you be so sure? Silas's eyes were hard as flint. Because I've met men like him before. They don't come for family. They come for what family can give them. What could I possibly give him? Clara, who had been silent throughout the encounter, suddenly spoke up. Land. Everyone turned to look at her. Your parents' homestead, where they died in the fire. Clara's voice was thoughtful. It was never sold. I remember the town council talking about it years ago. The property reverted to the family estate, but there were no known heirs to claim it. I didn't know about any of that, Ruth said slowly. You were 12 and grieving, and Vernon made sure you stayed ignorant about anything that might give you power. Clara's eyes narrowed. But if the land is still unclaimed, and if you're the sole surviving heir, then whoever has custody of Ruth controls the property, Silas finished, until she comes of age. It's just land. What could it be worth? Depends on the land. Clara moved toward the door. I'm going to send a telegram to a friend in the county records office, see what I can find out. After she left, Ruth sat down heavily at the kitchen table. He's going to take me, isn't he? The judge will side with blood over whatever I have with you. Silas sat across from her, his weathered hands folded on the table. Maybe, maybe not. But I want you to understand something, Ruth. Whatever happens in that courtroom, whatever the judge decides, it doesn't change what you are to me. And what's that? My daughter, in every way that matters. A piece of paper doesn't make family. Love makes family. Choice makes family. And I chose you the moment I saw you bleeding in that alley. Ruth felt tears threatening again. What if he wins? What if I have to go with him? Then I'll come for you. I'll follow you to San Francisco, to the ends of the earth if I have to. I'll fight every day until you're back where you belong. That could take years. Then it takes years, but I won't give up on you, Ruth, not ever. She reached across the table and gripped his hands. Promise me. I promise. They sat like that until Clara returned, her face pale and her hands trembling. I found something, she said, about the land, about why Edward Colton suddenly cares about a niece he's never met. Tell us. Clara laid a telegram on the table. 3 months ago, the railroad announced their new route. It's going to run directly through the territory where your parents' homestead is located. The land value has increased tenfold. Anyone who owns property along that route stands to make a fortune. Ruth stared at the telegram. So he doesn't want me. He wants the land. He wants both. You're the key to the land. Without you, he can't claim it. Silas's jaw tightened. Then we make sure he doesn't get either. How? He's got lawyers, he's got money, he's got the law on his side. He's also got a secret. Silas stood up, his eyes hardening with determination. Every man like Edward Colton has secrets, things he doesn't want people to know. We've got 3 days to find his. Ruth looked up at him. And if we don't, we will. Silas's voice was steel. Because I made you a promise, and I don't break promises. He strapped on his gun belt and headed for the door. Where are you going? Clara called after him. San Francisco, by way of the telegraph office. I still got friends from my Ranger days. Time to call in every favor I ever earned. He paused at the door, looking back at Ruth. You stay here, stay safe, and remember, no matter what happens, you belong to me. Not him, not anyone else. Me. Then he was gone. Ruth sat alone at the table, Clara's hand warm on her shoulder. He'll find something, Clara said softly. Silas Brennan never fails when he's fighting for someone he loves. I know, Ruth whispered. But as she watched the dust settle from Silas's departure, she couldn't shake the cold feeling spreading through her chest. 3 days. 3 days to expose a man with all the money and power in the world. 3 days to save everything she'd finally learned to love. 3 days to prove that family wasn't about blood, it was about choice. And Ruth Colton was choosing to fight. Silas rode through the night and into the next day, stopping only to change horses and send telegrams. By the time he reached Tucson, his old Ranger contacts had already started digging. Edward Colton, it turned out, wasn't as clean as his polished exterior suggested. He just had better lawyers. The man's got debts, Captain Montgomery told him, over whiskey in a cramped saloon. Big ones. His shipping company's been bleeding money for years. He's borrowed from every bank in California, and some in Nevada, too. How much? Enough that the railroad money would save him. Without it, he's finished. Silas felt something cold settle in his stomach. So this isn't about family. It's about survival. For men like Colton, it's always about survival. Other people are just tools to be used. Montgomery slid a folder across the table. There's more. His first wife died under suspicious circumstances. Second wife left him and disappeared. The household staff turns over every few months. Nobody stays in Edward Colton's orbit for long. Any of this provable? Circumstantial mostly. But there's one thing that might stick. Montgomery tapped the folder. His father Ruth's grandfather left a will, the original before it was modified. I tracked down the lawyer who drew it up. Silas opened the folder and read, then read again. This changes everything. If you can get it admitted as evidence. I'll get it admitted if I have to hold the judge at gunpoint. Montgomery laughed grimly. Wouldn't recommend that approach with Abe Mercer. He's honest, but he plays by the rules. Then I'll play by the rules. Silas stood tucking the folder inside his coat. One more time. He rode back to Dusty Creek, with the evidence burning a hole in his saddlebag and hope burning a hole in his chest. Ruth spent those 3 days preparing. Clara drilled her on courtroom etiquette, how to speak clearly, how to maintain composure, how to answer questions without revealing more than necessary. Dr. Walker came by to review his medical testimony. Even Marshal Montgomery offered advice on what judges looked for in custody cases. But it was Ruth who found the final piece of the puzzle. She was going through her father's Bible, the one possession she'd managed to keep through all the years at the Golden Dust, when a folded paper fell from between the pages. A letter in her father's handwriting. My dearest Ruth, it began. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and your mother with me. I'm sorry we couldn't protect you longer. Ruth's hands trembled as she read. Her father had known about his half-brother Edward, known about the family fortune that should have been his, known that Edward would come looking if anything happened to them. Edward is not to be trusted. The letter continued. He contested our father's will when I inherited the homestead. He claimed I was illegitimate, that my mother had tricked father into marriage. The courts ruled against him, but he never forgave me. If he ever comes for you, Ruth, you must remember this: your grandfather loved you. He changed his will specifically to protect you. There are copies with our lawyer in Phoenix and with the county clerk in Prescott. Edward cannot claim what was never his to begin with. Ruth ran to find Clara. "There's another will," she gasped. "My grandfather's. The original one. It says the homestead belongs to me directly, not to any guardian, not to any relative. Me. Edward can't touch it." Clara's eyes widened. "If we can prove that will exists." "My father says there are copies. Phoenix and Prescott. Silas is already in Tucson. He can reach Prescott in a day." They sent a telegram immediately. The night before the hearing, Silas returned. Ruth heard his horse before she saw him, and she was off the porch and running before Clara could stop her. "Did you find it?" "The will." Silas dismounted, exhaustion lining his face, but his eyes were bright with triumph. "Found it. Certified copy, witnessed and sealed." He pulled a document from his coat. "Your grandfather left everything to you, Ruth. Not to your father, not to Edward, not to any guardian. To you to be held in trust until you turn 18. So Edward has no claim, never did. He contested the original will and lost. He's been trying to get around it ever since." Ruth felt her knees go weak. "It's over. He can't take me." "Not legally. But we still have to present this to the judge. Edward's lawyers are good. They'll try to argue the will is invalid or forged or superseded by newer documents." "Is it?" Silas smiled grimly. "No, but that won't stop them from trying." The hearing convened at noon the next day. Judge Abraham Mercer was a silver-haired man with keen eyes and a reputation for fairness that preceded him across the territory. He sat behind a makeshift bench in the church, the same church where Vernon's crimes had been exposed just days before. The irony wasn't lost on Ruth. Edward Colton arrived with 2 lawyers and a file of documents 3 inches thick. He wore his finest suit and his most concerned expression, playing the role of devoted uncle with practiced ease. Ruth sat beside Silas Clara on her other side. Dr. Walker and Marshal Montgomery sat in the gallery, ready to testify if needed. "This court will come to order," Judge Mercer announced. "We're here to determine the custody of Ruth Colton, a minor of 15 years. Mr. Edward Colton has filed a petition claiming guardianship rights as her closest blood relative. Mr. Silas Brennan has filed a counter-petition for adoption. Both claims will be heard." Edward's lawyer stood first. He was smooth, articulate, convincing. He painted a picture of a loving uncle who had searched desperately for his lost niece, only to discover she'd been held captive by criminals, and then purchased by a stranger with unknown motives. "Mr. Brennan may be well-intentioned," the lawyer concluded, "but good intentions do not supersede blood. Edward Colton is this child's family. He can provide her with wealth, education, opportunity. What can Mr. Brennan offer? A failing ranch in the middle of nowhere." Ruth's jaw tightened. She wanted to stand up and shout that Silas had offered her love when no one else would, that he'd seen her as a person when everyone else saw her as property, that his failing ranch had given her the first real home she'd ever known. But Clara's hand on her arm held her in place. Then it was Silas's turn. He didn't have a fancy lawyer. He had himself a folder of documents and the truth. "Your Honor, I ain't gonna pretend I'm a rich man. I ain't gonna claim I can give Ruth everything money can buy. But I can tell you what I've already given her." He stood, his voice rough but steady. "I gave her safety when she had none. I gave her food when she was starving. I gave her a room with a lock on the inside so she could sleep without fear for the first time in 3 years. I gave her a chance to learn to read, to ride, to be something more than what Vernon Hawkins tried to make her." "Very touching," Edward's lawyer interrupted. "But none of that establishes legal—" "I ain't finished." Silas's voice cut through the objection like steel. I also found some interesting documents in my travels. About Mr. Colton's finances. About his debts. About why he suddenly got interested in a niece he never knew existed. He laid the papers on the judge's bench. Edward Colton isn't here for Ruth. He's here for the land. Her parents' homestead sits right in the path of the new railroad. It's worth a fortune now. And Mr. Colton needs that fortune because he's 3 months away from bankruptcy. A murmur ran through the gallery. Edward's face went white. Those documents are private financial records, his lawyer sputtered. Obtained illegally. Obtained from public bankruptcy filings, Silas corrected. Amazing what you can find when you know where to look. Judge Mercer examined the papers with growing interest. Continue, Mr. Brennan. There's more. Mr. Colton contested his father's will 20 years ago. He lost. The will clearly states that the homestead belongs to Ruth directly, not to any guardian, not to any relative. There's a certified copy right here. Silas added another document to the pile. Edward Colton has no claim to that land. Never did. This whole custody petition is just another attempt to get around a will he's been fighting for 2 decades. Edward rose from his seat, his polished facade cracking. This is slander. I came here out of love for my brother's child. You never met your brother. Ruth spoke up, unable to stay silent any longer. My father wrote about you. He said you tried to destroy him. Said you claimed he was illegitimate so you could steal his inheritance. A child's fantasy. It's in his own handwriting. Ruth pulled the letter from her pocket. He warned me about you. He knew you'd come, and he made sure I'd have the proof I needed when you did. Judge Mercer held out his hand. May I see that letter? Ruth walked it forward herself. Her hands were steady now. Her voice didn't shake. My father loved me, Your Honor. He protected me even after he died. That's what family does. She turned to look at Silas. And so does he. The judge read the letter slowly. Then he examined the will. Then he reviewed the financial documents. The silence stretched. Mr. Colton, Judge Mercer finally said, I'm troubled by what I'm seeing here. Your claim to guardianship appears to be motivated primarily by financial interest, rather than familial concern. Your Honor, that's simply not. I'm also troubled by your history with this family. You contested your father's will. You lost. Now you're attempting to gain control of the same inheritance through custody of a minor. The judge's voice hardened. That's not family devotion, Mr. Colton. That's manipulation. I object. Overruled. Mercer removed his spectacles and fixed Edward with a stare that had made criminals confess on the spot. Your petition for custody is denied. Edward's face contorted with rage. You can't do this. I have rights. You have the right to leave this courtroom before I charge you with attempted fraud. Mercer turned to Silas. Mr. Brennan, your petition for adoption is granted. Ruth Colton will hereby be known as Ruth Brennan, legal daughter of Silas Brennan, with all rights and protections that entails. Ruth couldn't breathe. Furthermore, the judge continued, Miss Ruth's inheritance will be held in trust as her grandfather intended, managed by a court-appointed trustee until she reaches the age of 18. At that time, she may do with it as she pleases. This isn't over, Edward hissed, rising from his seat. I'll appeal. I'll take this to the territorial governor. The territorial governor is the one who sent me, Mercer replied calmly. I suggest you save your energy for the bankruptcy proceedings you'll be facing when you return to California. Edward Colton looked around the courtroom, at the hostile faces at the marshals near the door, at the evidence stacked against him. For just a moment, his mask fell away completely. Ruth saw the man beneath. Desperate, greedy, utterly without conscience, and utterly defeated. He turned and walked out without another word. The courtroom erupted. People were shaking Silas's hand, clapping him on the back, congratulating Ruth on her new name. Dr. Walker was wiping his eyes. Marshal Montgomery was grinning for the first time Ruth had ever seen. But Ruth stood frozen in the middle of it all, unable to process what had just happened. Ruth. She turned. Silas was there, his weathered face soft with emotion. "It's over," he said. "You're safe. You're home. You're mine." Ruth threw herself into his arms. "Pa," she whispered the first time she'd used the word. "Thank you." Silas held her tight, his voice rough with tears he'd never admit to shedding. "Thank you," he said back, "for giving an old man something to live for again." They rode home as the sun began its descent, painting the land in shades of amber and rose. Clara had gone ahead to prepare a celebration. The neighbors were coming, the same neighbors who had stood against Vernon, who had testified for Ruth, who had chosen to be part of a community that protected its own. But for now, it was just Ruth and Silas riding side by side through territory that had become familiar toward a home that had become hers. "What are you thinking about?" Silas asked. Ruth considered the question. "I'm thinking about my mother. What she would say if she could see me now." "What do you think she'd say?" "I think—" Ruth's voice caught. "I think she'd say I found what she always wanted for me. A safe place. A good father. A real family." Silas was quiet for a moment. Then he reached over and squeezed her hand. "I think Eleanor would have loved you. My wife. She always wanted a daughter. Someone to pass her recipes to her books, her jewelry." He cleared his throat. "I've been keeping her things in a trunk. Didn't know what to do with them after she passed. But now, if you want them—" Ruth felt tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'd like that. I'd like that very much." "She had good taste, Eleanor. Better than mine. She'd have fixed up that house proper, made it a real home. I tried after she died, but—" He shook his head. "A man alone don't know how to make a home. He just knows how to survive in one." "We'll fix it together," Ruth said. "Make it what she would have wanted." "You'd do that. It's my home too now, officially." She smiled through her tears. "Ruth Brennan. That's who I am." Ruth Brennan. Silas tested the name, and she could hear the pride in his voice. "Got a nice ring to it. Better than Colton. That name never brought me anything but pain. Names don't make us who we are. Choices do. And you made the right ones, Ruth. Even when it would have been easier to give up. So did you." She looked at him, really looked, seeing not just the gruff exterior, but the wounded heart beneath. "You didn't have to save me. You didn't have to spend your money, risk your reputation, fight the whole town. You could have walked past that alley and pretended you didn't see anything." "Couldn't do that." "Why?" Silas was quiet for a long moment. "Because I spent 3 years pretending. After Eleanor died. After Thomas. I pretended I was fine. Pretended I didn't need anyone. Pretended the loneliness wasn't killing me. And then I saw you broken and brave and fighting to survive, even when you had nothing left to fight with, and I realized something." "What?" "That pretending is just another kind of dying. That the only way to really live is to let yourself feel things again. To take risks. To love even when love hurts." He looked at her with eyes that glistened. "You saved me, Ruth. Just as much as I saved you." Ruth couldn't speak, could barely breathe. She reached over and took his hand, holding it tight as they crested the final hill and saw the ranch spread out below them. Home. The word had never meant anything to her before. It was just a place, just walls and a roof, just somewhere to sleep and wake and endure. But now it meant everything. Clara was waiting on the porch when they arrived, a smile splitting her face. "There she is, my niece, my legally officially documented niece." Ruth laughed as Clara pulled her into a fierce hug. "I was your niece before today. Now it's on paper. Now nobody can argue." Clara pulled back, her eyes bright with tears. "Welcome to the family, Ruth Brennan. God knows we needed some new blood around here." "Hey," Silas protested. "Oh, hush. You know you were getting boring." The celebration lasted well into the night. Neighbors came with food and well wishes. Mrs. Patterson brought books she thought Ruth would enjoy. Old Pete Williams gave her a beautiful silver brush that had belonged to his late wife. Dr. Walker raised a toast to new beginnings and second chances. And through it all, Ruth stood surrounded by people who had chosen her. Not because of blood or obligation or law, but because they saw something in her worth protecting, worth loving. When the last guest had gone and the dishes were washed and the fire had burned down to embers, Ruth found herself on the porch, looking up at the stars. Silas came out and settled into the chair beside hers. "Can't sleep." "Don't want to. Feels like if I close my eyes I'll wake up and this will all be a dream." "It ain't a dream." "I know. But after 3 years of nightmares, it's hard to believe in good things." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds, crickets chirping, an owl calling, cattle lowing in the distant pastures. "What happens now?" Ruth asked finally. Now we live. We work the ranch. We eat Clara's terrible cooking." "I heard that." Clara's voice floated through the window. "And we figure out what kind of life you want to have." Silas turned to look at her. "You're smart, Ruth. Smarter than me, probably smarter than Clara." "Definitely heard that. And you've got options now. Education, travel, whatever you want." "What I want," Ruth said slowly, "is to stay right here. Learn everything you can teach me. Become someone my parents would be proud of." "They'd already be proud." "Maybe, but I want to be more than a survivor. I want to be someone who helps other people survive. Other girls like me who got lost in the cracks because nobody was looking." Silas was quiet for a moment. "That's a big goal." "I've got time." Ruth smiled. "I'm only 15. According to you, I've got my whole life ahead of me." "You do. And whatever you decide to do with it, I'll be right here, cheering you on, yelling at you when you're being stubborn, making sure you don't forget where you came from." "Where I came from?" Ruth considered the words. "I used to hate where I came from. The fire, the orphanage, the golden dust, all those years of pain and fear. And now I think, maybe all of it led me here. To this porch, this ranch, this family. Maybe I had to go through all of that to become someone who could appreciate what I have. That's a wise way to look at it. I had a good teacher." Ruth reached over and squeezed his hand. "The best, actually." Silas squeezed back. "Get some sleep, daughter. Tomorrow's a new day." Ruth rose but paused at the door. "Pa." "Yeah. Thank you. For seeing me when I was invisible. For believing I was worth saving when I didn't believe it myself." Silas's eyes glistened in the starlight. "You were never invisible, Ruth. You were just waiting for someone to look." Ruth smiled, the kind of smile that came from somewhere deep and true, the kind she'd thought she'd forgotten how to make. "Good night, Pa." "Good night, daughter." She went inside, and for the first time in 3 years, Ruth Brennan fell asleep without fear. Because she wasn't Ruth Colton anymore, the orphan, the victim, the girl nobody wanted. She was Ruth Brennan, daughter, survivor fighter. And she was finally completely, irrevocably home.